This is the Mixed Martial Arts Beat for the second week of January 2014. Hello again, everyone. I'm Ariel Helwani inside our New York City studio. Today I'm being joined by Luke Thomas of MMA Fighting.com and the Sirius XM Fight Club, the man who laughs in the face of winter. Of course, I'm talking about Jeff Wagenheim. He's right over there wearing his, what kind of...
This is my denial that it is winter.
Yes, it's unbelievable. I actually feel like it's August right now, just looking at you. So it's great to have you here. He is, of course, of Sports Illustrated, and then, of course, the man with the hat, Mr. Chuck Mindenhall of MMA Fighting.com. All right, guys, a lot to talk about this week. Of course, on Monday, UFC President Dana White went on ESPN News at around 4:30 Eastern Time, which is kind of a story in itself for another day, to break the news that Dominick Cruz is out of UFC 169, replacing him, Urijah Faber. He'll fight Renan Barao for the second time, February 1st, across the pond over here in Newark, New Jersey. Can you say across the pond? Maybe across the river, I should say. Pond sounds like England.
London.
You get the point. Anyhow, there's a lot to break down here, but just right off the bat, and you try not to get too sentimental about this stuff, but it's depressing news, right? It's really devastating to hear that after 2.5 years, we thought he was going to come back, a groin injury sidelines Dominick Cruz. When you heard this news, what was your reaction?
Very different than the Anderson Silva news, and for a couple of reasons. One, it now looks like Anderson Silva has at least expressed interest in coming back. We'll see what happens when he is in the process of rehabilitation, if he's still very serious about that. But there's at least a possibility of that. Also, it came at the very end of his career, where he'd already had all these accolades. He already had the 16 wins in the octagon. Dominick Cruz was just getting started, really heating up. And I think at this point, you have to say 2 years out from the ACL injury, which by itself is no guarantee you'll come back as normal.
Right.
Now another groin tear could be up to, I mean, we'll see, 2.5 years, maybe 3, depending on how things go. That is what I would frame as irreparable harm to your career. Not just professionally, where you're missing out on the Ultimate Fighter finale, where you're missing out on these chances to defend your title, but more than that, consider what Renan Barao just said about Urijah Faber. He's gotten a lot better since we last fought. Can you imagine, understand, Mike Fowler got his black belt in jiu-jitsu in 4 years. In 3 years, can you imagine how much better you can get in mixed martial arts, particularly when you're a student of the game and particularly when you're as dedicated as Dominick Cruz? There's no such thing as getting time back that you lost. You can only hope that you, A, were not that long, or B, you were so far ahead of the curve that when you go back, you still have a little bit of advantage. I think all that has been erased.
And right now, Jeff, we should mention that we don't know which leg he suffered the injury, if it's related at all, maybe he was compensating, who knows? Right now, Dominick Cruz has not talked to anyone. His coach, Eric Del Fiero, doesn't want to talk to anyone. So the details still a little, murky right now, but, as Luke said, you have to start wondering if we'll ever see him fight again, right, at this point?
Yeah, I mean, beyond the physical damage and the damage to whatever his career is, as Luke expressed, just the emotion of it. I mean, you asked Luke what his reaction was, and I know my reaction was just like, just imagine what this guy felt. He's been out for going on 28 months, and then another setback. I mean, so beyond the physical repair, the physical damage, the damage of his career in terms of how he relates to other fighters, just the psychological letdown, and that's why I imagine he hasn't talked to anybody. He just probably I just project that he's probably pretty morose right now, and who knows? Who knows if he's going to be able to come back from that? I imagine he'll find a way but in what state will he come back?
I've had a chance to work with Dominick Cruz, and this guy is so obsessed with fighting. He's good at the TV stuff. He's a really good analyst.
Absolutely.
He's
at the TV stuff.
But he doesn't want, that's not what he wants to do. Right. He is obsessed with fighting, and that's why you can't help but feel so bad for him. You can't help but, man, your heart goes out to this guy.
Right.
You try that many times, and let's not forget, he didn't have just one knee injury. He had the comeback, then a setback, another surgery, now this. We can't sit here and speculate whether or not he's done, because that's just, that would be very careless on our part. But it's going to be very interesting to see if he can return to the form, because now he's no longer champion. Where do they even put him if he comes back?
Well, I mean, and if there's a silver lining, maybe it's that he doesn't face Barao right off the bat, because I think a lot of people really looked at that as like, that's asking a lot for a guy to come back from over 2 years and to step in against a guy like Barao who's been fighting and looking great in that whole time. But it is really disheartening for Dominick Cruz. He's 26 years old, and at the ESPN at the time, we had him, I think, flirting right around the number 4 spot of the pound for pound, like somewhere in that range. Yeah. That's how good, that's how good he had been. His only knock, if you remember when we were talking about him back in the day, was he went to decisions. He'd only finished one guy, I think it was Brian Bowles, and the whole time he was in WC and UFC. So our knock on him was that he's not finishing guys, but the way that he was beating guys was fairly spectacular in a subtle sense. He was just his movement and everything else. We started to watch certain nuances of the game. It's really a shame to see a guy who was maybe changing some perceptions on MMA in general, get on the shelf this long, and we're to the point where you wonder how many people will even know who he is, but because the influx of fans and everything else, know who he is by the time he finally returns, which hopefully happens at some point in the new year here. But it's just a really disheartening thing where they would actually put him, at that time when he finally is able to come back. Hopefully it's a guy more in that, in the top 10 space, but not right up at the top again, because I feel like now at this point, after all this and all the psychological damage and everything else, if he's able to come back, you'd like to see him kind of go gradually back to the top if he's able to do that.
This is also mentioned him as a cerebral guy, as an analyst. He's also cerebral as a fighter too. And the last time that I spoke to him, he was talking about his Barao matchup, and he could break down Barao in ways that I don't think too many other fighters could do. Now that's all up in the head, but that might be the thing that helps him once he gets over the initial shock and just sadness over what's been happening to him. His ability to think through how he's going to come back and how he's going to attack fighters. I mean, I know that all the physical damage from his, that he's sustained is going to somehow impair his movement, and he's a movement fighter. But he's also that guy who's like, he sort of can figure you out, and that might be the thing that saves his career.
Right now, we don't know when or if he'll come back. I was saying, I think it was on this show just a few weeks ago, my most anticipated fight of 2014 was Cruz versus Faber 3. We might get to see it if Faber wins, and then they book that match right away. But here's, the kind of heartless question that you have to ask. And a lot of people were wondering this, asking me this when this news was announced. Is this a more interesting pay-per-view now? Will it sell more pay-per-views now because Urijah Faber is arguably the most popular fighter below 170 in the UFC? He's trying to get that UFC belt. Do you think more people will now be inclined to buy UFC 169 because it is Faber instead of Cruz going for the belt?
I don't think so, actually. I was wrestling with this. I don't think it hurts it in any real measurable respect. Everyone on Twitter initially when the news broke was like, oh my God. I think I'd never seen the word gutted more on Twitter than I did that day.
A lot of Brits all of a sudden.
Yeah, right. That was funny. But the reality is, everyone followed up with, well, you know what? Faber's a more popular guy, and I don't dispute that. However, you go back and look at the pay-per-views that Urijah Faber's been a part of and the events on Fox or FS1 or wherever the platform was that he was on, they've all done well, but there's no clear indication he was a guy moving units. Now, that's different when he fights in Sacramento and at the Live Gate, and I'm not saying about that, but if he's fighting in Jersey, does he really move more pay-per-view units than Dominick Cruz would in this bout? In theory, it sounds nice, but if you look at the numbers, the only he's never been above 500, and the only 2 times he fought with 4 was when he was on the card with Ronda Rousey and on the card with John Jones. They could do that without him. So I'm not saying he's not. It's not a good fight. I think the changes since having Dwayne Lowood there are real, and I think it'll be interesting. And again, it's a great fight. It'll do well. Is it a real big uptick in business? I don't think so. Considering how many chances Faber has had to fight for a belt as of late, are you surprised he's taking this fight on such short notice? You can make the claim that if he loses this one, that might be it for him.
Yeah, but what do you do? We've learned time and time again that when a fight of a high-profile nature is offered to you, you got to take it. I mean, basically a championship fight or a fight for a #1 contendership. Guys who have not taken it or who have somehow tried to angle themselves to a later opportunity often don't get that opportunity. So, yeah, I mean, 3 weeks' notice is no time to prepare for Barao. But as Faber told me, the night that he got this fight announced, he said, well, I'm not a guy who thinks that I'm the best because of how I prepare or train. I just think I'm the best. And I mean, this is him trying to convince himself of that. But I think there's a certain mentality that, well, I'm going to prepare myself anyway. Plus, he's already fought Barao. Not that he had great success against him, but he's fought him already. So he's already at least has a sense of what it's like to be in with that guy. And he's earned his shot. He's earned the shot. We probably were going to see Faber against one of those 2 guys, whoever won the fight anyway. So it just gets pushed up a few months, and sure, you got to go for it when the chance is there.
he brings up. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, realistically, the UFC didn't have a lot of options either. I mean, I heard some people mentioning a Sun Sal maybe getting in that shot. He's won 5 fights in a row, but he's just
Sun Sal versus Barao main eventing a show in New York.
That's what I'm saying. It's like it's just not going to happen. That's
that wouldn't even main event in Fortaleza.
But he's the closest guy that you could make an argument for to actually do it. So it's either Faber or you move this off the card, and the card really takes a big hit. So I feel like they did the only thing they could possibly do, which was get Faber. And the truth was, he went 4-0 in the last year. He was going to be that guy anyway. And hats off to him for taking the fight, especially given that this could be it. He may not get another, under these condensed circumstances, he may not get anything, even if he loses it, even given those circumstances that he's doing it on short notice. But I also look at Renan Barao and I think, that's pretty cool of him, who's already beat Faber, to just be like, you know what, yes, let's go ahead and accept the opponent switch here and keep the main event. I don't know if the UFC sweetened the deal for him or something like that, but he's the champion. They took the interim tag off, and I feel like that's all part of it. But it's, it was, in part, that's cool of him to be like, no problem, let's just bring Faber on then, you know what I mean?
You're the only one here who can literally take your hat off to Urijah Faber. How about that?
But he won't.
No, he won't. Honestly, it does say a lot about Faber, because remember, after UFC 149, when he lost, we all kind of said that's it for him. I mean, how many chances is he going to get? No one. You haven't seen one person dispute this decision, putting him. Like, he has truly earned his place back as #1 contender. And, even 2 fights ago, we were saying, oh, you beat Menjivar, you beat Jorgensen, they're going to give you another title shot. People were kind of like ho-humming it. Now it's really, it's a no-brainer. You have to do that fight. And I think a lot of people are actually very excited to see him fight him again.
Fighters are the best fighters are typically some of the most delusional. It's true. Like, you talk to them and they say things, you're like, what? But they have to put themselves in a position where doubt is simply not in play. And Urijah Faber, though, is different than someone like Junior Dos Santos, maybe not with mentality, but just by position, where Dos Santos would, just get bludgeoned by Velasquez and then be like, well, I'm going to beat him again. Even after this last one, he was like, well, I can make some adjustments, and he still hits like a girl and all that kind of stuff. Faber never lost confidence. And I would ask him about some of his losses, and he'd be like, yeah, you know what, it didn't go out, but I know I'm good. I know how great I am. And in a calm way, not in an angry way, not in a vengeful way, just like, I know I can beat these people, and I know that I'm this good, and I'm not really too worried. I know these opportunities are going to come. Just really a very even-keeled temperament, and it has allowed him to keep getting better, he also stays healthy too, by the way.
Yep.
All those things work together for him to constantly get these opportunities. You have to really sort of admire him.
It's his 5th fight in less than 12 months. It's remarkable, really. At a guy, his age with his mileage.
And the truth is, like, when you take a look at his career, there was a time there in maybe 2009 to 10, 11, where he might have been spreading himself a little bit too thin with his businesses, his books, all the things going on. He was traveling a lot. I think he's sort of maybe rediscovered his love of fighting a little bit, because when you look at 2013, going 4-0, he finished, I think, 3 of those guys. It's very much like the 2007 Urijah Faber, the WEC, where he beat Dominick Cruz, and he finished all of those guys. He's got a little bit of momentum on his side in that way, and I feel like that's what makes it a little more intriguing to see this rematch with Barao. Is just you're seeing him, more in that attack, like, sense of urgency in his fighting, which is, it made him it's what made him a draw to begin with, and I feel like if he brings that side of it, we could actually see a really great event.
And it's funny also that we talk about the injury to Cruz and what Dominick lost, but he was training to fight Faber. And that was going to be a big payday for both of those guys. And when I talked to Faber the other day, he was saying that when that fight went away, suddenly he was off the Silva-Sonnen rematch. He was off this really big, high-profile card and got shipped up to Calgary. He was headlining a fight card that he said, well, it was a fight card that nobody cared about against a guy that nobody knows, which, Barao. And he said, well, I wasn't that excited for the fight. Well, in a way, I would question why you're not excited about a fight that could bring you into the interim championship. But that aside, he said, now I'm really excited. Well, he's now in the main event of a fight card, which is also sort of curious in that this is the main event. Typically, the UFC makes the heavier weight fight, if it's a title fight, the main event. They didn't do that for Cruz versus Barao because they were claiming it was like champion versus champion, so it was an exception. This is not champion versus champion. This is champion versus #1 contender. So it should be the #2 fight, but they're keeping it #1, breaking their own format of their own tradition. And maybe
I
that's
was told,
part
by the way, that they promised Barao they didn't want to break that promise of him being the main event.
Yeah.
They're still both 5-round fights, so it doesn't really matter at the end of the day.
Yeah, well, and also Urijah is a bigger name than Lamas and all that. So, but it's interesting that they would go away from their convention, even having made that promise.
Chuck, final thing on this. Obviously, there's a lot at stake for Faber, a lot at stake for Barao. He gets to defend, the championship for the first time as the real champion, right? But what about Bang Ludwig? Once again, the microscope is on him. In my opinion, these guys got the title shots in the past. Do they need to win a belt for him to really be considered a great coach?
Probably. And it's like we see this in all of sports. There's always these coaches that can take their team to the Super Bowl, like, Marv Levy, was it Marv Levy?
Yes.
Marv Levy back in the day. 4 times. I mean, there's always these guys who can take it right up to the cusp, but they can't get over. I feel like he could be in that space, particularly if Faber were to lose, and, we'd be in the same situation. Maybe Mendez gets back up there. But I do feel like for him to have that total impact, and you see it with a guy like Ray Longo, for instance, who's brought a couple of guys along, and they've got it. And all of a sudden, Ray Longo is like being celebrated among fans and media and whatnot. I feel like for him to really take that next step, I feel like he probably does need to get one of those guys up there because they're all living in that space, in that top 5 space. A lot of his guys, and they've had chances. So this could be Faber's last one. And if he doesn't get it, I don't know how much of that would actually fall because I feel like he's probably back up there because of Dwayne Ludwig, but I think that he needs it to sort of solidify himself as that kind of coach.
I'm not buying the last one thing, by the way. We said that prior to 149. Now here we are again, going into 169, and he's fighting for the belt.
Right.
Let's move along, guys. On Monday, and this is a relatively quiet week as far as events go, and we'll get to that later on in the show. But on Monday, the executive vice president of World Series of Fighting, Mr. Ali Abdelaziz, was on the MMA Hour, and he put out this challenge to Bellator, which apparently he is not very fond of. And this challenge was essentially a card, 10 fights. It breaks down really, go 9 fights, 1 extra fight, which I think is a little confusing in itself. But anyway, where winner takes all, whichever promotion wins the most fights gets the spoils, they get the pay-per-view money, whatever. He pays his guys, they pay their guys. He broke it all down. People were talking, they get excited about this kind of thing. What's your take on it? What's your take, and I can't wait to hear this, what's your take on the challenge? And then Bellator refusing to comment, accepting or not accepting it. They just don't want to comment on this.
Yeah, I sent their PR guy an email who's usually very responsive, and it was radio silence on the other end. You know what, man? I actually don't mind it. I thought it was, I looked at the card. Card was kind of fun, actually.
It was fun.
It's a good card. And Rampage versus Tyrone Spawn, I'm in.
That's the one that doesn't count for whatever reason.
Doesn't count, but it'd still be, wow, that'd be a really fun fight,
Tremendous.
I thought, first of all, on a serious note, I did think it was like, there's a lot of good fighters outside of the UFC. They're splintered across the landscape, but there's some great fights out there. And to the extent that we could actually bring them together, boy, it'd be great. Not gonna happen. So here's the deal. Like as we all mentioned, Bjorn tried this with Coker when Melendez and Alvarez were out there, and it was good because it's the number 3 nipping at the heels of number 2. It's trying to find, that it's. I hate to put it this way, but it's like it's the vultures picking over the carcass. There's not a lot left, and they're trying to get what they can out of it. The only thing that I really was amazed by, where fans were like, "Dude, World Series of Fighting has a point. If they won, they'd be the number 2." It's like, do you understand the profound number of ways that is stupid? Like, World Series of Fighting could run the table and it would change nothing.
Bragging rights, maybe.
Sure, and maybe
business,
they could use it as like a public,
but business-wise,
perception thing, or they could lose all of them and it still wouldn't change anything.
True.
The reality is Bellator, in terms of market share, absent what the UFC takes up, which is 80 to 90%, they have a greater piece of the pie. They do much higher ratings. They have significantly higher investment. They did 25 cards last year. World Series of Fighting did what, 6 or 7?
They're trying to do 14 this year, but yes.
You get the idea. And they're trying to expand, and we'll see how they do. Listen, all that could change. But I'm just pointing out this, the notion that a single fight between these two entities, or a single event between these two entities, is some sort of arbiter of who actually controls the market space is nonsense. Fun nonsense.
Yeah.
I'd want to see it nonsense, but nonsense.
So how about Bjorn not, even responding when he was in this spot 2 years ago? What do you think of that?
I cede my time back to the gentleman from Washington, D.C. more of that. No, well, of course he's not going to respond because for all the things that Luke pointed. Yeah, I mean,
it would be fun though.
It would be fun.
I mean, my take on it is, to see those two organizations, if they're going to start, fighting with each other, becomes something that I'm not that interested in. I'm interested in maybe seeing some of those fights.
Right.
And it was like when when the UFC sent fighters over to Pride,
Sure.
like Liddell, that was interesting to see what would happen.
Everyone's been in that spot.
But there wasn't, and there was probably some underlying stuff, but it wasn't the same kind of like, little fighting that. I mean, I just want to see the fights. I'm not that interested in all the backstabbing and like, we're better than you and all that kind of talk. That's not really interesting to me. But some of the fights that were listed on that card, that mythical card that we'll never see, I'd watch them. It's
funny. The whole Scott Coker thing that happened back, was it 2010 or 2009? Whenever that happened, these are coming from the similar positions because World Series of Fighting being maybe the number 3, like you were mentioning, it's a clear number 3. Then challenging the number 2, it's just it's a perception thing. Let's play with people's perceptions on this, which is the fight game in general. It's all based on perception. That's how they sell these fights. But it's like at the time when he was texting Scott Coker, they were the number 3. So Strikeforce, it's always the guy, it's always the ones below him are trying to stir something up with the number 2 and just kind of make it, because you can't. You might as well have fun with it because the UFC is its own thing. It's just it's its own.
It's so far out ahead.
Yeah, it's so far out ahead. You're not going to do anything. It doesn't even register. It doesn't even. It's not even fun because it doesn't register. So it's like when you get those two things, it is sort of fun. And it actually was. It was a lot of fun to kind of go down this fight card and actually contemplate that. Yeah.
Well, I don't know about the Brett Cooper David Branch fight, but
had to get something in there.
You know what's crazy though? Like Bjorn Rebney always says, it's a 2-horse race now. Nah, not really. It's like if me and Usain Bolt were on the track.
Right.
Okay, it's a 2-horse race, but one of us is pretty far ahead of the other one. But it just sort of got me to think. It was like, you know what? Because there was a moment there. Remember when Dream and Strikeforce had that sort of semi-talent sharing? It's never going to happen because of the way in which Bellator views itself and what Viacom wants out of them. But it would be kind of cool if there were a way for non-UFC promotions to have a more open idea to talent sharing. Because, again, what the card did illustrate, I was like, dude, these are some sick, like Rick Hahn versus John Fitch. Yeah. Yes, please. Yeah. And I don't know, John Fitch might even win. Who cares? But these are really, really, really fun fights. And it's only, I'm not blaming Bellator. They've got their aim, and no one can sort of say that they're wrong for wanting to do what they want to do. But it just sort of tells you that if we can find a way, if promoters can sort of relax a little bit and say, the one thing that Abdelaziz said that was correct was like, this is good for the sport. That's true. If the lesser promotions work together, that is good for the sport. It is good for the fighters. The problem is it's just not in alignment with business reality.
So why does it work in boxing? One promoter will have one guy, the other will have their. And why can't it work in MMA? You remember Elite XC and Strikeforce? That was an epic failure. I mean, they went to court, all this stuff with Frank Shamrock.
It doesn't work in boxing. Golden Boy does not work with Top Rank.
I mean, that's kind of a new thing.
It is a new thing,
but
yes.
Historically, I mean, it happens all the time in boxing, right?
Okay,
they come together.
Sure, but like for example, if well, first of all, guys are protected in boxing.
Yeah.
But you mean as an organization?
Why can promoters?
You mean like why
set their egos aside to a degree,
right?
But they can't do it in MMA,
right? Like why
can't Legacy call up World Series of Fighting and say, hey, let's
open it up?
There's a bigger spillover too. Like if Top Rank has a fighter on a card against somebody from another promotion, and the Top Rank fighter loses, it doesn't have the same spillover to all the other Top Rank fighters. So if Bellator does this thing and a bunch of World Series of Fighting guys win those fights, suddenly, even though despite what you believe, the truth is that the perception out there in the world becomes that the World Series of Fighting is better. Even if it isn't, even if it's based upon a tiny little bit of reality that's not true, that's the perception out there. So they have to sort of protect their brands. And it is like if it's a if it's a 3-horse race or if it's a 2-horse race, it is Secretariat and Mr. Ed. But somebody wants to be Mr. Ed. They want to have that.
I just think that kind of buzz, if people can set their ego aside. Imagine if it's even like Titan versus Legacy and they say promotion versus people get excited about that kind of thing.
Absolutely.
They like those wars, you know what I mean?
It's a good move either way because ultimately we're sitting here talking about it and a lot of people were talking about it. So why not throw something out there? Even if you have, I'm sure he understood that there is very likely going to be even a response from it.
The thing is, like in boxing, you have Gary Shaw and like Goosen. They'll work together, but like Gary Shaw's office is an answering machine. You know what I mean? The UFC is out for like complete vertical integration.
Yeah.
And I think and Bellator is trying to do the same thing with what they can in space, complete vertical integration. And so they have these designs that simply, they have to define their own little universe, and they can't allow themselves for the universes to clash, even if there is a case to be made working collaboratively. Everyone, it's possible. Not with that card.
Sure.
Well, first of all, World Series of Fighting stacked the deck. It was like, we're going to have men fight women. Set it up, you know.
How about this, though? If UFC called up Bellator and said, let's do this, us versus you think Bellator does it?
Wow.
They do it 1,000%.
You think so?
They do it 1,000%. They're in a discussion. They don't want to do it because they view World Series Fighting beneath them. They're not above this kind of thing.
Yeah, but
they just don't want to give them, the sort of, they don't want to give them the rub.
I mean, could the egos of Dana White and Bjorn Rebney ever get along?
Of course, it will never happen.
That'd be the co-main event.
Bellator would say, "Tell me when and where, and we'll be there."
Oh, if you, that's right? True. Yeah, of course.
So it's just that. It's really a perception thing.
Yeah.
2 years ago, they were down to do it with Strikeforce.
Yeah, of course.
So if these other two organizations wanted to do this, they should be in the back alley, sort of planning it all out, but then out in the public fighting about it.
Right.
But orchestrating it quietly in tandem, just because everybody wins. Everybody wins. Both promotions become elevated by having this, more attention. Any attention.
This is the time for Nick Diaz's promotion to step up and
Yes.
take this challenge.
Get War involved.
He would fight everybody.
I'm just daydreaming here about the Bjorn Rebney Dana White press conference with them holding hands.
Only if they could fight in the last-ditch IFL hexagon. Remember that?
Yes, of course.
They have to, and Chris Hordesky has to headline.
Yes. That was a great pick. With the ropes, though.
Yeah, only with the ropes.
Yeah, only with the ropes. All right, I think we had a lot of fun with that one, guys. Speaking of fun little stories that kind of just won't go away, what about Brock Lesnar? I mean, it just seems like this story is so bogus on so many levels, but no one's really denying it. No one's squashing it. They're letting it go. Brock Lesnar is a guy who left the sport after, a bout with diverticulitis. He clearly couldn't cut it. Top-level UFC guys, goes to pro wrestling, works like 4 days a year, makes a ton of money, doesn't have.
Job.
I mean, he has a great gig. Why in the world would he come back to UFC? Here's the question: why are we so fascinated with him still? We saw what happened to him at the end of his UFC run. Why are people still interested in seeing him back inside the octagon?
I don't know if it's true or not, but I saw an argument once made, I think by a writer on Bloody Elbow, maybe John Nash. I'm not sure. I have to go back and look. But they broke down the numbers on pay-per-view. And they said without Brock Lesnar, it's arguable that the real UFC boom, because Randy and Chuck were doing well, and Ultimate Fighter that all would have happened no matter what. But that real stratospheric climb would never have happened without Brock Lesnar.
I agree with that.
Yeah,
UFC 100.
I think it's a compelling argument, and I don't think if he came back, it'd even be close to that. As I understand it, in fact, correct me if I'm wrong, the authority here on pro wrestling. As I understand it, some of the stuff, I think an event he had in pro wrestling did really poor on pay-per-view. Is that true?
That's Dave Meltzer territory.
Oh, is that right? Okay.
No, I mean like pay-per-view buys for pro wrestling.
Yes.
Come
Okay.
on. Who do you think I am here?
Well, whatever the case,
a little respect.
I don't think it would be. I don't think, and for all the reasons in MMA, the diverticulitis, getting his ass whipped by Alistair Overeem, it wouldn't be the same bonanza. But I do think it's. I was poo-pooing the idea of Fedor coming back. I'm probably a bit of a liar. I would.
Fedor versus Brock?
I don't mean Fedor versus Brock, but I just mean there are some guys you just have a hard time letting go of. And the reality is Kimbo Slice is one of those guys too. The love of these men die hard. It dies very, very hard. And I'm sure it's less than what it was. But Brock Lesnar back in the right kind of matchups, versus, I wouldn't put him in Stipe Miocic necessarily, but, Nikita Krylov. I mean, this would be a mugging of epic proportions.
Yeah.
I would watch that shirtless. This would be a wonderful thing for the business.
Well, the difference for me, at least, between Brock and the other two guys you mentioned, Fedor and Kimbo, is like, Kimbo was exposed as a one-dimensional guy that just never really had enough to cut it in MMA. Fedor got old, and there was no reversing that. Lesnar, when he started losing, it was around the time of the diverticulitis. So let me pronounce that better. He got ill and he was losing. So to some extent, it's his one-dimensional wrestling-only skill. But another way of looking at it is that he got injured, he got ill. and that was his demise. So there's still a little bit of a mystery there. If he came back and he was fully healthy, could he beat some people? I don't know. I mean, I think he still would be exposed by guys who could handle him. But there is still a little bit of mystery. Like if he were actually healed and 100%, what could he do? And plus, there's also the pay-per-view numbers that he can bring. But just as a competitor, there's a little bit of mystery.
I mean, he's a star, and when you take a look at it, he still has a share in the UFC record for heavyweights and title defenses, which is crazy. So he has actual merit to his name. It's not like he was just this novelty like we were talking about with Kimbo Slice, at least. It's not a novelty act. I mean, he could fight, and he did get sick, and so there is a little bit of intrigue on those levels. But it's one of those things that I think when you look at the landscape right now as we head into 2014, we talked about this a little bit last week. There's just not that many stars. Suddenly, a lot of our stars have sort of gone away, or they're hurt, or whatever. And I think that it captivates the imagination to have a guy come back like that. I know that when we were at this show at UFC 168 in Vegas, there was all this buzz about, is he going to be in the arena? Is he going to be there? Some people were saying that he was there, that sort of thing. It's really interesting that one guy can sort of do that, and even Shane Carwin going on there and sort of exacerbating it by making it. I mean, you see that stuff, but you realize that he still has that. He captivates the imagination, Absolutely. And people want to see him. It may not do the same numbers as like UFC 100, but I think if he ever did really come back, it would be agreed that it should be the right kinds of matchups. I don't know if we'd really want to see him going against Cain Velasquez again or something like that, but it would be. I think it would be a big deal, and I think part of it is just that. Right now, there isn't that many exciting things going on with the UFC. It's all sort of off on the horizon right now. With some of there are some good fights, but a lot of the people who are used to paying for and used to being excited about are no longer there or are walking away.
But isn't this all? We haven't established that this is not just a pro wrestling publicity stunt, right? I mean,
well, I've talked to people very close to Brock who tell me this is not happening.
Yeah.
He doesn't have a team. He built a team in his backyard. That team no longer exists. He doesn't want to, Cain Velasquez, when he's healthy, is training every single day, 7 days a week, 365. He doesn't want to do that. That's essentially why he left. He just can't devote that much time.
Chris Teixeira would be back in no time. I was going to call him that.
Exactly. Yeah, right. This came out as an internet rumor. It's great for WWE because it heads into WrestleMania season. He's a big part of that. It's good for the UFC because, it's something to talk about. And by the way, it's great for the media as well because anytime you put up a Brock Lesnar story, people are clicking on it, especially when you put out that beard one. I love that one.
Yeah. So is someone like pulling Lance Pugmire's chain or something?
No, Lance Pugmire, from that tweet that I saw, Lance Pugmire of the LA Times, asked Dana, and he said he wouldn't comment on it until anything's done. Dana White said to me face to face, I will lie to you about Brock Lesnar. He said the meeting went horribly. Remember, he was all upset after that event in Florida, and then we come to find out they were so close to making, apparently, according to him, the Fedor fight. Someone passed away in Fedor's family. He said, I lied to your face.
But where's the interest? Where does he get benefit from perpetuating that?
UFC talk. It's in the headlines. Brock Lesnar. Oh, yeah, there's some intrigue. UFC 168, that was just a little storyline that was just kind of there. I bet a lot of people were saying, oh, can I see Brock? And just people get excited about that kind of thing.
It just blurs the lines in weird ways. I was at the Boston Globe a couple weekends ago, and one of the college students who works there came up to me because he knew I wrote about the UFC, and he goes, oh yeah, I see that Brock Lesnar had such a great run in the UFC, and now he's with the WWE, and he's not doing that well. Why do you think he's not doing as well in WWE? And I was like, well. Maybe it's because the scripts don't have him winning, And I was like, you're a college student, and I was a little bit perplexed.
What college? Wasn't Harvard. I can tell you that.
It might have been.
He wasn't going to school in Cambridge.
But there is this kind of like perception that gets too. I just the intermingling of these two worlds, sports and whatever you want to call it, entertainment. I don't know.
The bottom line is he was larger than life. He is still larger than life. He's the only guy in WWE who can wrestle with his own sponsors. I mean, the guy clearly is a huge deal. If he came back, we'd all be watching. We'd all be down to see it. In my opinion, he'd be a bigger draw than Fedor or Kimbo, obviously, if they came back. I just don't understand. At the end, after you sit down and buy the pay-per-view and say, I'm about to watch Brock Lesnar, there's really no intrigue into what he can do inside the octagon. That ship has sailed. So I guess it's fun to talk about it and all that stuff, and of course we would eat it up. But when you actually think about it, Brock Lesnar, MMA fighter, that's done. That book is done. So I don't understand why it's eliciting this kind of reaction?
Because we as consumers, or maybe just me as consumer, we're idiots, right? Because if you look at it, you look at something like it's like Renan Barao, man. Like, what could you ask more from a fighter from an ability standpoint? Zip. He's got it. That is basically as good. I mean, I'm not saying he's number one pound for pound, but when you look at a fighter like that, you're like, that's pretty much the highest level of the game right there. And he probably can't get many people to watch. Brock Lesnar, who probably hasn't thrown a jab in years,
right?
Might even get knocked out by Kimbo at this stage of the game,
wow,
and tugs at your heartstrings. You're like, what? This is why when Dana White's like, you can't judge a card until it's over. It's like that's so nonsensical. That has nothing to do with the motivations of why consumers purchase this kind of product, because we want to see people that, however irrationally, grab our attention.
Yeah. You're emotionally invested in that.
Yeah, and it's not even a matter of skill versus non-skill. It's a matter of how you can promote. I mean, look into boxing. You know, Floyd Mayweather, a wonderful boxer, but not that interesting to watch. You know, there are guys who are much more exciting to watch, but nobody promotes a fight like Floyd does. And of course, you know, nobody promotes a fight like Brock Lesnar does.
And he doesn't have to do much or say much. He's just so compelling. Okay, guys, let's end on this. As I mentioned, it's a rare quiet weekend. When you think about how many events UFC is going to do this year, Bellator, World Series of Fighting is amping it up. Who knows about Invicta? You got little guys like Titan and Legacy. I mean, there are going to be a lot of weekends with a lot of events going on, and this one is pretty quiet, surprisingly, to start the year off just a couple weeks in. I was thinking, you know, we don't have anything better to do on Saturday night. We're going to be pretty bored. We're going to have nothing to do.
I'm going to be massively drunk.
So what I wanted to do was our version of the MMA Beat book club, where we recommend an old card that really, for whatever reason, is near and dear to your heart. That you're going to. I know you'll be drunk. You're going to miss MMA action. You'll probably live blog it. You're going to want to pop in, you know, the VHS into that old VCR of yours, watch it, reminisce, and maybe remember why you love covering the sport or why you just love the sport so much. What's that event on a quiet weekend, cold Saturday night in January that you're going to watch or you want to recommend to the people?
Yeah, easy choice. Easy choice for me. MMA debut of Matt Brown. No, I stole your thunder, didn't I? No, it's super easy choice. Pride Body Blow. Rampage Jackson versus Kevin Randleman, one of my all-time favorite fights. And of course, there's a lot of other good fights in that card too, but this was where Fyodor Emelianenko wrote the blueprint on how to beat Antonio Rodrigo Nogueira. A master class in ground and pound. Shocking. And it was one of those moments where you can hear the commentators, in this case, I believe it was Bas Rutten and Stephen Quadros, who were just couldn't believe what they were seeing. And true, genuine surprise, not like, wow, what a stirring victory, but like they were in legitimate awe of a man who can. I love events like that because you go into it and the rules of the universe are written. And then one guy goes in and completely rewrites the universe. And you have to understand it in a whole new way. Pride Body Blow was that for me.
All right, what do you got?
I'm going to think outside the octagonal box, and instead of picking out a fight card, I'm just, I haven't done a lot of exploration in the Fight Pass, the UFC Fight Pass, but the other day when the Cruz fight went away and suddenly it was Faber in a rematch, I went in there and found the Faber-Barao, the first fight, because I wanted to watch it again, see how it actually played out, and then when I was in there, I was noticing they had all the Faber fights, all of his UFC and WC fights, and I was thinking, this is a cool thing. So I think what I would do is pick a fighter and just watch that fighter chronologically through his or her career all the way through. And I'm not sure it will be Faber. It might be.
This would be a good time to revisit.
It might be him, but that'd be like work, because then I'm preparing for this fight. So I'm going to find somebody who's not fighting for a while.
Yeah.
Maybe Matt Brown. I think Matt Brown. Maybe check it out.
Matt Brown's a new promotional malpractice, isn't he?
So Jeff is the one guy who knows how to navigate Fight Pass. Well done.
You know what? I managed to find the Faber-Barao fight.
Okay.
And I saw a menu of other fights. But that was the extent of my navigation, so we'll see what happens.
Let us know how that goes.
Yeah.
I'll take it a step further and say the whole UFC 149 card is amazing. No, for me, I would go back for one of the most unique experiences, which I was at and watched afterwards as well, was the Affliction Day of Reckoning card. Because of all the, it was all the things that had kind of gone. That was the second one. Yeah, so it was like there wasn't any Megadeth performing on this one.
Count me out.
But it was a really interesting card. It was that big Emelianenko versus
Which
Arlovsky.
was a very big deal.
Yeah,
That fight
it was a big deal, and the way that it went down in the fight. It was also Vitor Belfort had kind of rushed it back into consciousness by knocking out Matt Lynn, and that was one of the few times where I actually watched a guy twitching on the ground and thought, I hope he's okay. Like, where you literally aren't sure if he's okay. It had that. It was also, I was editing a paper at the time out in Southern California, and Bobby Green was from our area there, so we knew about him, and he got kind of a late notice call to go fight Dan Lozon. That fight was all bizarre, point deductions for groin strikes that may or may not have been going on. It was just, the whole thing was just had sort of a circusy feel to it. I believe that was the one, too, where Tito Ortiz was actually conducting the awkward interviews in the cage.
Speaking in pig Latin.
Yeah. So it was like all of that combined just made for a really unique experience. And it's something that, like, if you revisit it, you kind of remember, all the bizarre things that were going into that fight card.
And that huge ring. Remember how big that ring was?
Yeah, that was like a big outsized.
It was unbelievable. And Whammo was involved too. Remember those guys?
The upside down belt?
Yes. Exactly. I'm going to give honorable mention to UFC 58. It wasn't a great card, but I just love those kind of gimmick cards, Canada versus USA.
Is that BJ Penn?
That was BJ Penn, George, as the co-main event, David Loiseau versus Rich Franklin. And Loiseau got creamed in the main event, but Loiseau was actually my first favorite fighter because he went to school nearby from where I went to school, and he's a Montreal guy, and it was just cool, Canada, USA. It was so... It just kind of came out of nowhere, really. I mean, there was no real rivalry there.
Were you living here in the States at the time?
I was living in Montreal, actually a student at Syracuse, but it was in 2006. I had already graduated. I was living here. Wow, weird. I was home, though, when the pay-per-view aired. Anyway, side note. I like that gimmick card. And, they did it with the heavyweights a couple of years ago. I think they should explore more things like that. I don't know if Canada, USA, or maybe USA, Brazil, something like that. I think people would...
Korea, Japan is the big one for me. That's the one they got to get all over that one.
That could be coming soon. I think Mark Fisher actually teased that. Anyway, my pick, though, is UFC 95. For some reason, every time I think of my favorite UFCs, I think of UFC 95. It was headlined by Joe Stevenson versus Diego Sanchez, and it wasn't a great main event, but 10 fights on the card. The first fight was a decision. Last fight was a decision. Then the 8 fights in between, all finishes. Junior Dos Santos on the undercard, knocking out Stefan Struve. Dan Hardy knocking out Rory Markham. There were a bunch of really quick finishes. And then Damian Maia, how about that? You remember when he submitted Chael Sonnen without really landing anything? It was a card in London. It was a numbered card on Spike on tape delay back in those weird days. I love that card. That was a really great card. It was one of the very best in recent...
It's the first time I've thought about UFC 95.
Yeah, it was fun. It was a lot of fun.
The MMA Beat Book Club.
Yes.
With no books.
VHS Club. How about that?
The VHS Club. That's a good one.
Yeah. Anyway, let us know what you'll be watching this weekend if, of course, you do miss any MMA action. A rare quiet one, as we mentioned. Luke, we know what he'll be doing. He'll be going through Fight Pass shirtless and maybe drunk.
Borrachito.
What does that mean?
Very, very drunk.
Oh, okay. Very nice. And of course, let us know what you think about anything we talked about on today's show in the comments section below. And the good news is we're back next week with another episode of the MMA Beat. For Luke, Jeff, Chuck, I'm Ariel. Thank you so much for watching the Mixed Martial Arts Beat right here on MMAfighting.com.